may this be one of the best moments of your life. You're listening to the Business Mirror podcast for a broader look on business with Senior Editor Dennis Estopace.
Good day, I'm Dennis Estopace, and our topic for today is the World Trade Organization, or WTO. There are two journalists behind the story on the WTO, Business Mirror's Jasper Emmanuel Arcalas and Kai Ordinario. For the text version, please go to www.businessmirror.com.ph and search for 24 years with the WTO. Is it still relevant to the Philippines? The story of that title was published in the Broader Look section of the Business Mirror newspaper on July 25, 2019. Let's get on with the story. The temperature was 15 degrees Celsius outside the 93-year-old Center William Rappard in Geneva, Switzerland, when Jose Antonio Buencamino walked into the atrium of the World Trade Organization headquarters and gave a warm future of the Philippines with the Multilateral Trade Organization. It was the 15th of May and Buencamino, Philippine mission to the WTO Special Trade Representative, has just come out of a meeting, his last for the day. The issues surrounding the WTO are real and should be addressed, he told the Business Mirror after the perfunctory introductions. The WTO has to adapt to the times. 24 years is a very long time for a very dynamic issue that is trade policy. Buencamino said from a red chair, an olive tree at his back. Buencamino would know he was part of the country's negotiating team when the Philippines was acceding to the WTO in 1995. It remains very relevant, but there's a need for few adaptations or reforms to make sure it functions even better, Buencamino said. But a complete overhaul of the WTO treaty, I don't think that's what we're talking about. What was once viewed as a hope for countries like the Philippines to spur trade in the global arena is now being seen as a lost cause. The dream created by the WTO when it was established in 1995 has slowly become a mere fantasy with a stalemate at the Doha round. No resolution is in sight for the talks, which began in 2001. The collapse of the talks in 2008 forced many countries to intensify efforts to carve their own corners in the world through regional and various bilateral trade agreements. This has left many to believe the WTO has lost its effectiveness. Hence, the question to Buencamino, economists and stakeholders on the relevance of the WTO. For Asian Development Bank Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department lead economist for Trade and Regional Cooperation, Jayant Menon, the hope created by the WTO remains real, despite the disenchantment created by the collapse of the Doha round. The ADB executive told the Business Mirror that the WTO remains the curator of the multilateral trading system, which is the only one that allows developing, and poor countries to sit at a table as equals. We have to imagine a world without the WTO to recognize its importance, Menon said. The WTO is an organization where every country has an equal seat at the table. This does not exist in bilateral and regional negotiations taking place right now. Menon added that more countries can be bullied in so many different implicit ways into agreeing to all kinds of things in these agreements. Menon added that with the WTO, which is consensus-based, every country must be on board. Different countries can form coalitions to protect their special needs, and they can use that as a way of ensuring that they don't get bullied into concessions or making allowances that do not protect their sovereign rights. Menon explained that these things can happen only with a multilateral institution. Menon noted that the WTO has pushed for the Aid for Trade initiative to bring rich and poor countries together to find ways to improving trading capacity of developing and poor countries. He said that Aid for Trade initiative helps developing countries address bottlenecks in trading that prevents them from accessing markets or bars international markets from trading with them efficiently. These initiatives, he said, address both hard and soft infrastructure as well as behind-the-border issues that have blocked trade flow between and among countries. Through the years, Menon said the WTO has helped developing countries expand their trade horizons. The WTO has been instrumental in bringing down tariffs and removing non-tariff barriers worldwide, he said. Menon added that under a multilateral trading system, countries can resort to the trade dispute mechanism at the WTO to fight for their sovereign rights. This is a result of the rules-based system enforced by the organization. The World Trade Organization also considers dispute settlement as one of its core activities. The institution said that a dispute occurs when a member government believes another member government is violating an agreement or a commitment it has made to the body. The organization said that since its establishment, over 500 disputes have been brought to the WTO and other 350 rulings have been issued. Menon said the Philippines has used the WTO's dispute mechanism. Based on the organization documents, the Philippines has been a complainant in 5 cases. The country has also been a respondent in 6 complaints filed against it by several countries. All of these agreements, bilateral and regional, still have to comply with a broad set of rules set by the multilateral system and governed by the WTO as an institution, Menon said. And I think that remains important, despite the proliferation of bilateral agreements and now major regional agreements. It remains important and plays a very useful role in keeping a rules-based world order and providing an effective dispute settlement mechanism. Aside from dispute mechanisms, other key issues hounding the WTO involve member countries' obligation to report relevant information, such as subsidies. Key issues also include special and differential treatment and the appellate body. The United States has raised its concerns on the non-compliance of member countries to report to the WTO information in relation to fulfillment of its obligations under the treaty. The United States has tabled a proposal for a stronger transparency among member states by imposing administrative punishments for non-compliance. Among the punishments for member countries that will not be able to notify the WTO in a timely and transparent manner is the non-election to committee chairmanships. The non-election to committee chairmanships is among the punishments for member countries that will not be able to notify the WTO in a timely and transparent manner. Bencamino said he supports the call for a strong, transparent, timely, and full notification of member states' obligations to the WTO. However, Bencamino said he cannot go along with the punitive measures proposed by the United States. Bencamino explained that member countries have valid reasons on why they could not notify or report to the WTO its obligations. This includes administrative and logistical concerns. For example, countries are required to notify licensing requirements that they implement to provide other members predictability in trade. However, it is tedious to do it, as it would entail dealing with a lot of government agencies, Bencamino said. See, you have capacity constraints. Agencies are weak, data collection is weak, and those are real problems across all members, Bencamino added. The solution there is to ask for technical assistance, but you should be forgiven for not notifying. What should be sanctioned is willful non-notification of commitments. Bencamino said. Bencamino added that the issue of special and differential treatment shouldn't be a case of categorization. He explained that what matters most in trade negotiations is that a country fulfills its commitments and obligations under the WTO treaties. Proposals have been tabled at the organization to provide clear-cut guidelines on how to determine if a country is developed or developing one. One proposal pointed out that countries belonging to the G20 or Group of 20 are applying for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development or OECD. These countries are classified as high-income class and accounts for more than 0.5% of global merchandise trade and should be considered developed country. Large economies such as China and India would be adversely affected by such proposals as they are still considered developing countries at the WTO arena. At present, WTO member countries are just asked to classify themselves, whether they are developed or developing countries. Under the institution's agreements, developing countries enjoy a longer timetable to implement its agreements and commitments. They can also utilize trade measures to safeguard their interests. For Bencamino, it should be pragmatic. He believes we do not need to judge if a country is developing or not. What matters most is that they comply with the rules and commitments. Meanwhile, the WTO's appellate body, which serves as its Court of Appeals, has been under scrutiny by huge member countries, especially the United States, in the recent years. The concerns by the United States on the appellate body include its alleged non-compliance of the mandated 90-day release of reports on disputes, and acting as if the sole interpreter of the WTO treaty. The United States pointed out that the appellate body has interpreted WTO rules beyond what was negotiated at the Uruguay round in 1986. Due to these concerns, the United States has repeatedly blocked proposals to fill in the vacancies in the appellate body. The appellate body is comprised of 7 judges, but it has gone down to 3, the minimum number for it to be able to act on disputes. According to Buencamino, the vacancies in position must have been filled yesterday, not next week, tomorrow, or whenever, but yesterday. What is happening now is the threat of the future of dispute settlement. If the appellate body ceases to exist, then disputes could forever stay in appeal, hence there's no victory. WTO officials told the Business Mirror that the multilateral organization remains a relevant arena, especially for the Philippines, because issues it is interested on include agriculture. WTO spokesman Keith Rockwell said, "This is a place that provides the Philippines an avenue to express their views and make things work to provide better life for Filipinos." Rockwell said in an interview in May at the WTO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, "And if this organization is placed in a position that is under threat, that forum in which the Philippines has thrived and prospered over the years runs the risk of not being there for the Filipino people." Rockwell pointed out that the Philippines sending of officials to represent it to the WTO shows how the Republic deems the organization very important. The WTO offers a place where you can stand, you can fight your corner, you can express your views, and you can iron out problems before they get too big, Rockwell said. "It is a place where the utility of it is obvious to the people in Manila because it keeps sending top quality people here. It's most obvious that this is a place that they hold dear," Rockwell added. The Philippine economy started opening up to the world even before the WTO came into existence, according to Ibon Foundation Executive Director Jose Enrique Africa. Africa said this occurred during the efforts of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank as far back as the 80s. As a result of nearly 4 decades of trade openness, Africa said the share of trade in the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, grew to 130% in 2017 from 88% in 1994. He lamented, however, this openness to global trade and foreign players did not lead to Filipinos and domestic firms making it big. The country's openness to foreign locators, according to Africa, only increased the country's imports instead of exports. Africa added that local firms found it difficult to compete with cheap imports, and this has been observed especially in recent years on the country's widening trade deficit. In the past 3 years alone, the country's merchandise trade deficit reached as much as nearly $44 billion at the end of 2018, data from the Philippine Statistics Authority revealed. On a monthly basis, the country's trade deficit would run anywhere from nearly $1.6 billion in April 2017 to nearly $4.5 billion in October 2018. According to Africa, the Philippines is more open and trade accounts for a much larger share of the economy than before. However, Africa said that the economic force of trade have unfortunately weakened rather than developed domestic production. He added that the share of agriculture and manufacturing in GDP have fallen to lower levels today than in the 1990s before the WTO. Africa added that domestic producers have not been and are not able to compete with cheap imports and have not and are not able to export commensurate to the opening up of the domestic economy. Our chronic and recent record trade deficits expose the country's trade and development failure under the WTO, Africa said. Africa explained that the failure to compete also led the country to become a more service-oriented economy rather than an economy that produces food and non-food products. Africa added this also forced millions of Filipinos to seek greener pastures abroad to earn a living as overseas Filipino workers. Based on the 2018 survey on overseas Filipinos, there were nearly 2.3 million overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs. The number is composed of 1 million male and nearly 1.3 million female overseas Filipino workers. Africa said that the Philippines after the WTO has become a service and labor export-dependent economy more than a producing economy. This keeps job creation low, unemployment and underemployment high, incomes poor, and productivity and dynamism stifled. Apart from these, Africa said the multilateral trading system is still not inclusive since it prevented the Philippines from undertaking vital national industrial policies. This includes subsidies, protection, technology transfer, and other regulation of foreign investment. However, Africa said bilateral and regional trade agreements are also not necessarily any better than the WTO, for the same reasons cited by Menon that make these agreements difficult to undertake, especially for developing and poor countries. Things could have been worse for the Philippines, particularly to its small-scale farmers without the WTO, according to Raul Montemayor, National Manager of the Federation of Free Farmers, or FFF. Montemayor told the Business Mirror that a rules-based trading system is beneficial to small countries like the Philippines, who can end up being bullied by large trading partners in the absence of rules. For example, the absence of discipline on domestic support and export subsidies would have allowed our trading partners to continue subsidizing their exports and protecting their producers without limits to our disadvantage, Montemayor explained. Or, other countries could easily block our exports with arbitrary changes in their tariffs. Montemayor said the rules-based system is far from perfect, and the impasse in the Doha Round negotiations have made it difficult for member countries to reform the WTO. For one, the consensus approach that the WTO undertakes should be changed as it seems to be unworkable in this time and age, Montemayor explained. So, it might be better to negotiate and come on an agreement on specific issues, much like a legislative system where the Congress passes bills on particular issues from time to time, Montemayor said. The impasse in the Doha Round negotiations also meant a stall in the reforms that could have led to an improvement of the Philippines' agriculture sector. Montemayor pointed out that uncompetitive sectors of agriculture were adversely affected by the accession of the Philippines to the WTO due to the influx of cheaper imports. Montemayor said that while we have tended to focus on our defensive interests by blocking or managing the influx of imports, we have not devoted enough attention to promoting our agricultural exports. As a result, I think we have consistently had agricultural trade deficits in the last 25 years. Montemayor added that although rules have been set up to put a cap on subsidies and arbitrary tariff changes, these are far from perfect, and many large economies continue to provide large subsidies to their farmers and exporters, and use various trade barriers on imports. The Philippines has also become more vulnerable to price and supply volatility in the world market, Montemayor explained. He added that if there was one big mistake that government negotiators made in acceding to the WTO, it would be the lack of consultations with private stakeholders. The lack of stakeholder involvement in the formulation of negotiating positions led to doubts on the motives of government in pushing for the country's accession to the agreement, Montemayor said. Fred Serrano, formerly the Agriculture Undersecretary for Policy and Planning, told the Business Mirror in an interview in 2018 it was not yet the right time for the Philippines to accede to the WTO in 1995. Serrano, who was still with the Philippine Rice Research Institute during the 1994 negotiations, pointed out that the Philippines had every reason to delay the ratification. Serrano said he considered the Philippines a developing country. We wanted government to front-load domestic support measures for farmers before ascending, Serrano said. But what happened is that our negotiators fast-tracked the ascension. If Serrano said he had been the chief trade negotiator then, he would have decided to postpone the ascension of the Philippines to the World Trade Organization for 2 years. We should have conducted consultations first, Serrano said, and then promised to the people that domestic support would be front-loaded 2 years prior to the ascension. Serrano became part of the country's negotiating team in the year 2000 and served as one of the top negotiators for agriculture when he assumed the position as Undersecretary in 2005. It was a position he likened to an operator of a vulcanizing shop. I always tell stakeholders our tire has been sold, Serrano said. I just performed the vulcanizing because our tire has too many holes. We can't return to 1995 and hence we can only plug the holes. What we can only do today is find out how we extract the best deal for the benefit of the Philippines, Serrano said. While Menon in Africa may have different perspectives on the World Trade Organization and its role in the growth of developing countries like the Philippines, both believe that what is happening right now to the multilateral trade system is an opportunity. Menon said with the disenchantment of countries on the WTO and its ability to promote free and fair trade worldwide, the institution must now recalibrate its efforts. Menon added the WTO should move forward and consider the Doha round of talks dead. According to Menon, What is happening right now is countries and regions have sliced up the Doha round into pieces that serve certain countries and regions. While this is not ideal, in the sense that it removes the ease by which certain concessions and agreements are reached with just a single undertaking, Menon said it also removes the opportunity to reach an agreement where countries or regional players would all give up something for a mutual benefit. This will be lost if you carve Doha into sectoral agreements because you're dealing with each on its own rather than trading them off in search of an overall better outcome, Menon said. That's the cause of slicing up Doha in this way, but that seems to be the only way forward, unfortunately, at the moment. This kind of cherry-picking that starts with the ECS, Trade Facilitation Agreement, is the only way forward without losing everything that was negotiated in the Doha round, Menon explained. As a multilateral institution, the World Trade Organization should also reform, especially given the current trading milieu, according to Menon. Menon said there were no global value chains that existed when the WTO was created, and there were still countries producing goods from start to finish. Today, Menon said no single product is solely produced in just one country, and that every product now enters a global value chain or a regional value chain where it is assembled and completed. Further, more economies are now service-oriented, Menon said. This was also not the circumstance in 1995, when many economies were either purely agricultural or industrial or a combination of both. I think the WTO has also to reform. It's a very different world today that we trade in that it is dominated not by arm's-length trade, as was the case when it was set up by global value chains. For Africa, the crisis of multilateralism is also a good time for countries to reflect on the economic challenges that came along with the birth of the World Trade Organization in 1995. He said the WTO should reform and become more democratic by limiting the influence of small groups of powerful nations in terms of policy and direction. However, Africa said he is not too optimistic about this kind of reform being done in the organization. But it was noteworthy that big powers in the World Trade Organization like the United States want the Doha round discarded. Africa added that the US, European Union, and Japan, for example, want stricter intellectual property rights, restrictions on government support for industry and state-owned enterprises, and limits on special and differential treatment. Nevertheless, World Trade Organization Deputy Director General Alan Wolf said, the WTO's purpose remains relevant to the Philippines as it ensures fairness and predictability in the global trade. For one, according to Wolf, the organization ensures that a product produced by the Philippines would be treated fairly by other member states and would not be prejudiced. Secondly, the World Trade Organization offers predictability in trade and business. It provides countries a platform to ensure that their goods would be able to enter or not other global markets, Wolf added. Wolf said in an interview in Geneva in mid-May that the WTO provides rules for international trade and administers them. The World Trade Organization is essential for all members, including the Philippines. On the issue of the WTO reform, Wolf said it is the responsibility of all member countries to follow suit the mandate of the Group of 20, to engage in efforts that would improve the organization and resolve the issues surrounding it. For Ben Camino, the World Trade Organization needs to be modernized based on today's realities, as the global trade system has evolved beyond what was imagined 24 years ago. Ben Camino said in 1995, we did not have a powerful unit like China. Now you have a powerful unit like China, which doesn't play fair. Despite the different opinions on which road the WTO should take, it is clear that the current challenges faced by the multilateral trade system should bring about reform. And the World Trade Organization, being the curator of such system, may not have any choice if it seeks to remain relevant in the lives of billions of people worldwide, especially those in the developing and poor countries. The Doha round may be dead, but all hope is not lost. It is up to the World Trade Organization to keep the dream alive.
Thank you for listening to the Business Mirror podcast. For a broader look on business, follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Business Mirror. Until next time.